Hello, Philippe. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Hello, it's a pleasure.
Perhaps if we could just start with if you wouldn't mind giving us a brief introduction to yourself and, of course, where you fit into Baxter.
So I'm Philippe Francois, so I'm the Vice President of Supply Chain for Baxter for Europe, Middle East and Africa. So I've been in the supply chain field for something like 20 years now, having different positions, of course, in Europe and in Asia. So I'm looking at different aspects of the supply chain, from the customer service to the back end, the planning, the distribution.
So what have been the biggest changes then? I mean, it's a long time to have been seeing it. You must have seen quite some sweeping, dramatic changes in the last few years.
Absolutely. I think the main change is the role of the supply chain in the organization right now. It's quite obvious that if I look backwards, in fact, in a few years from now, it was a very, very operational function, and now I can see that the supply chain is really in the heart of the strategy of the company, because distribution is everything. It's a big part of the cost, so of course we need to be part of that strategy.
So you're very much an influencer now?
I think it's moving that way. I mean, if you look at the healthcare especially, in fact, there is a huge pressure in terms of cost. People are not necessarily looking for more product, they're looking more for solutions. And of course, we've got an opportunity within the supply chain to try to look at different services, talk to our customer to try to look at how can we be more efficient, how can they be more efficient, how can we find, in fact, win-win solution between what we can provide, the skills we've got, the strengths we've got, and the need.
So how did you go about encouraging that cross-company buy-in?
I think the most important is to be very, very close to your market, to your customers. And I think the buy-in internally is perhaps not the most important. The most important is really to spend time on the market, talk to your customer, and making sure that you can try to translate their needs, go back to your commercial team and try to tell them that potentially you can help them to find solutions. And I think as you do that, of course, it's the customer who's playing for you.
So in trying to find those solutions, what are the constraints that you find yourself under right now? And how's that influencing your strategy?
I think the key constraints, obviously, there is cost constraints. There is a question of, how do we want to share infrastructure? So, I mean, and the cost constraints, of course, is a very, very important one. Lots of constraints around integrity, compliance, obviously, which is increasing the cost. But at the same time, if you just leave it there, that's not good enough. You need to go to the next level, which means, once again, talking to your customer and trying to understand, okay, what else can we provide to make sure that we will bring more value to you, and at the end of the day, you will bring more value to us because we understand your needs.
And so what specifically have you then employed over the last few years from a strategic point of view?
I think the first step for us was really to look at the integration of the supply chain, to make sure that you control the supply chain from really the usage of the product in the market. So making sure that you've got a good understanding of how patients basically are using drugs or devices, and making sure that you've got, I would say, standard processes within the company to capture that value, and then try to integrate them as much as possible to do two things, in fact, to be more reactive, to be more agile, and to control your cost.
A segmentation strategy to the supply chain. How did you go about developing that, and how has it manifested itself now?
I mean, the segmentation is going back to the market itself and trying to understand, okay, what type of value do I bring to the customer, and really trying to understand, okay, those segments, how do we control them in a different way, and what is the value for each segment? You don't do that in isolation, of course, because as I told you, in fact, the supply chain function was a very, very operative function at the beginning, I think 10 years ago. But now it's quite clear that there is a need for that. And of course, you can start to integrate, I would say, upstream and downstream to really control the cost of the supply chain. Downstream, of course, up to the customer services, the contact with the customer to make sure that you've got a better understanding of their needs, and step by step try to help also the commercial to try to look at not only supplying a product, but look at distribution channels. To different, of course, channels like direct to patient, hospital, wholesalers, and making sure that you start to shape your whole infrastructure in terms of supply chain per channels. And of course, if you want to do that, the first step would be to understand the specificity of those channels, which will push you, in fact, to segment your market.
Now, have you dealt with shocks to the supply chain? I'm thinking specifically, as well as the economic downturn, there's also the environmental impact, those various crises that have happened over the past few years that nobody could predict. How have you dealt with those, and how have you planned for the future?
Well, that's true that if you look at the current supply chain right now, there are really, in fact, worldwide channels, and we are impacted by any type of crisis in the world. And if you looked at the earthquake, for example, in Japan and Turkey, has impacted, of course, our supplier in different ways. And Turkey, for us, as an example, it's a big market. So, of course, our channel to deliver our goods to the customer were impacted. And if I take the example of Japan, it was the reverse. It was suppliers, especially in the electronic industry and device industry, where we had massive issues because, suddenly some components were not available anymore. So this forces you to look at alternative solution and to try to look at basically continuity of supply, put plan in place to make sure that you can try to anticipate that to a certain extent. It's of course more and more stringent because those supply chains are more complex, but that's the way you have to go after it.
Now, another issue that is often less spoken about, but is also clearly very important, is that of talent management and the people that you bring on board for managing your supply chain. What approach do you take?
Yeah, that's an excellent point because once again, it was our job was quite technical at the beginning. So supply chain years ago was mainly logistics, which is distribution and warehousing. And these days it's totally different. In fact, we start to include different competencies in terms of planning, as an example, looking at the demand versus capacity planning, so forecasting, all the models that we're using for the forecasting. On the customer service side, of course, it's a different set of skills also because you talk directly to the customer. More and more, in fact, it's not only the usage of the product, but it's the data behind the product. So you need to understand the product. So that's a good point because suddenly we're facing, in fact, a massive challenges in terms of the level of skills. At the same time, it's a wonderful opportunity because I think to grow our people internally, we can look at different, I would say, silo of competencies, and you can rotate, in fact, your people from one silo to another one to make sure that you can prepare them for the long term. As an example, we've got a free area of expertise, which is basically the interface with the customer, which is one area. We've got another area of expertise, which is really the distribution and warehousing. And a third pillar in terms of expertise, which is demand planning and capacity planning for the long term. And we're trying to rotate people from one domain to another one to prepare them, of course, for the long term.
So just finally then, where do you see the supply chain function developing over the next few years?
I think the key is the fact that we are really now providing solution and not product anymore. We're not here to support and supply product in a compliant way and that's it. I think people are looking for us help us to find the right solution, which can be very different, which can be helping an hospital to basically manage his own inventory, trying to develop solution, in fact, for patients to manage their own therapy in terms of the practicality of the therapy, the coordination of different services. So definitely, in fact, you can see that our job is really, in fact, changing a lot.
Well, thank you very much, Philippe, but we are unfortunately out of time for this interview. But if people do want to find out more about Baxter and what changes you're making to the supply chain, where can they go?
Well, I mean, that's exactly why I go to Logipharma, in fact, because for me it's a very, very good way to, first of all, benchmark as much as I can with peers from the industry and trying to understand if my reading, of course, of the market, is shared by different people and the type of solution that we'll have to put together. I mean, collaboration is key, we know it. And that's, we are looking for those type of forum to collaborate as much as possible, to learn from the current trend and, of course, find the right solutions. And finally, then, just the Baxter website, where would that be if people want more information on your company? Well, they can go on the Baxter website, of course, and we've got a specific website on the supply chain side where they can find the way that we're structured and basically our strategy also. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for speaking with me. It's been a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.